who were slain. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, we thank you for the gift of life. We thank you for the gift of faith and of the gift of dignity that is ours through being created in your image and likeness. We ask you to bless our evening today. We ask you in a special way to comfort those who are grieving the loss of their loved ones in Colorado and in Atlanta. We ask for you to send your spirit of justice and peace, so that we would live a more humane and a more just and holy existence, that we would value all life from conception to natural death. In your name we pray. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So again, welcome everyone. We've had a number of these sessions, these St. Anthony sessions in justice that really began in September. And we've featured, I think, a number of interesting opportunities to hear from a variety of people. We had the first session was an opportunity to delve both into spiritual and psychological resilience. And we had a wonderful psychologist from Houston who I've worked with, and that session is on our website. And so that was an opportunity to really explore in a time of crisis how we can, as Christians, really plumb the depth of the wisdom of Catholic teaching, but also psychological wisdom as well. And so that can be watched. We also had a panel discussion that I moderated with Sergio and also with other parishioners as well, Mari Pillai, Ryan, who I see on here as well. And we had Marshall as well, Ryan Hamilton and Marshall Collier were on that panel. That was really amazing. Just great insight and wisdom from our parishioners and from our friends. Dr. Yohuru Williams gave an amazing talk and an inspiring talk on racial justice and the long history of racial injustice in the United States. Very compelling. Last month we had Monsignor Chad Guion, who is a friend and classmate and is the pastor of the Indian mission on Standing Rock in the Diocese of Bismarck, and that was a conversation. And that format seemed to work well. Sergio is going to be the main voice. I'm just going to do a little bit of kind of hosting this evening, but Sergio is the expert in economics and particularly applying Catholic social teaching to economics and economic theory. And he's going to tell the story about how he was invited to participate in a conference, a Vatican conference for young economic students, not only students, but practitioners, young economists is the word that I'm struggling with. And so where this idea came from, these St. Anthony sessions on justice, is the idea that we have this rich Catholic tradition, Catholic intellectual tradition, and we have this great gift of Catholic social teaching, and we live in a society that is good, but also broken and wounded. We have signs of light in our society and also signs of darkness and injustice. And it's the role of the church to propose principles of Catholic social teaching and principles that are rooted in faith, but also natural law and scripture, to try to attain justice in a more just and humane social order. And it's not the primary work of the church. That primary work is salvation, but it's an important task that the church takes up. And so one of the great gifts of the church, which I talk about a lot at Lourdes, and many of you are represented on this Zoom call, is the laity. So you are living day in and day out through your lives of holiness and faith. You are trying to make the world a more just and loving and humane place through the daily work of faith that you enter into. And that's really where Catholic social teaching meets the nitty-gritty of life that we live together. And so today we're very happy to have Sergio Barrera with us. He's a member of our Justice and Charity Committee. He's one of the most thoughtful parishioners that we have at Our Lady of Lourdes. And he's going to talk about his family as well. In the coming months, we're going to hopefully hear from my colleague, Mark Osler from the St. Thomas Law School. We're going to try to get Mark scheduled and ask him to speak on his work of clemency. And also Ryan Hamilton, who's working as a lobbyist now for the Minnesota Catholic Conference, to talk about a recap of some of the work that they've been trying to do and work that'll be ongoing. I'd also like to get my colleague, Artika Tyner, to do a recap at the 1-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd in terms of where we are as a state and as a country. So I'll be reaching out to those folks as well. I want to thank the ongoing work of the Justice and Charity Committee under the very able leadership of Julie Ditter, who is on our call tonight. I thank Julie and the members of our Justice and Charity Committee for their great work. So we welcome Sergio. You're very welcome to the St. Anthony session. Sergio has some slides that he's going to share with us. Here's what we're going to do for the format. We are going to have a period where we talk, I ask some questions of Sergio in terms of his background and some of his interests and how he ended up at the U of M, at Our Lady of Lourdes, how he was invited to this great conference, and then his insights that he took from the conference. And then he's going to share with us some very thoughtful slides that he's done. He's done a number of iterations of the application of Catholic social teaching to this goal of a more inclusive economy. And he'll share those slides, and then we'll have time for questions. You're able to go through the chat function on Zoom, and I have some questions myself. But first question, then we're going to ask the same question that we asked of Monsignor last month, if there was another profession that Sergio might have entered into, what might that be? And I'm going to offer a profession myself had I not been a priest. Some of you can guess what that might have been, maybe not. So Sergio, the floor is yours. And the first question I have for you is just to tell us about where you grew up. Tell us about your family life, how you became interested in economics, and how you arrived at the U of M and the work that you're doing, and then we'll move to that topic of the conference. So if you can just give us a little bit of a biographical sketch, including your wife and your family.
Okay, so no problem. So I grew up in Sierra Vista, Arizona, and that's a small town in southeastern Arizona that's right next to an Army base. Just to give a little bit of a background information, I mean, I'm obviously a Mexican American. I'm a second generation American. My father immigrated from Mexico, and my mother, on her side, her grandparents also came from Mexico. So for me, growing up, economics has always kind of been part of, in a sense, at least some kind of economic idea has always been part of my identity growing up, because I know, as I was mentioning, my grandparents, they came to the United States for work probably around during the 1930s, and my grandfather worked in a mine in southeastern Arizona, or my great-grandfather. And then my dad met my mom, who was growing up in a border town right next to the Mexican border, and they got married, and they decided that they were going to live in the United States as opposed to Mexico, because there was just better job opportunities and better opportunities for their children in the United States. And so my dad, growing up, my dad is a very smart, very hardworking man, and he's been pretty much my role model since I was a child. Just to give a little bit of context, my dad came to this country without the equivalent of a high school diploma. He probably only finished around 9 years of school. He didn't speak a word of English, and yet as soon as he got here, one of the first things he did was he saw a construction company was hiring, And he went, even though he didn't speak English, he went and applied for work and he became a construction worker. And so when I was growing up, my dad spent a lot of time working. My mom spent a lot of time taking care of me and my three siblings. And I was able to see, at least through my dad's experience, how somebody who traditionally we would think about in this country as being underprepared for the workforce, somebody who lacks the quote unquote skills to be successful in the workforce, actually make a good living for himself and a good living for my family. So I certainly grew up believing that there was good economic opportunities in the United States, and that if people worked hard, then they could find stuff to be successful at. That being, I also knew that there was a lot of hardship too. My younger brother was diagnosed with diabetes when he was around 5 or 6 years old. I don't necessarily remember. And that affected my family a lot. And I remember shortly after that happened, we started thinking a little bit more about the medical bills, and my dad had to start working a lot to be able to provide a good life for me and my family. And yes, right, as I mentioned, my dad worked hard. My dad provided for us. When I was born, we lived in a trailer park in the rough side of town, and then we slowly started kind of moving up, getting into better housing, better stuff like that. But, there were still problems within my community that I witnessed growing up that just kind of led to an air of pessimism. So by the time I was in high school and middle school, I wasn't that good of a student anymore. I was pretty much, I had around like a C average, mostly because I got a lot of D's that balanced out my B's and some C's in between. So I had like a C average pretty much from middle school to high school. And, I remember thinking around 9th grade that, and I've told this story a lot. So in middle school, I remember they brought representatives from the University of Arizona to try to get us excited about college, right? And I remember being really excited about it, but nobody in my family had ever done anything like that. And so for me as a kid, that seemed it seemed like quite an accomplishment. Like in my eyes, like going to the University of Arizona was like going to Harvard, right? That's how difficult it seemed. And so right around 9th grade, when I started messing up in school again, because I just, I had trouble focusing. I wasn't that interested in it. And, but as soon as I messed up, like I pretty much thought that there was no hope for me to go to school anymore, right? I thought I messed it up and there was no way that the U of A was going to let me in, because I thought the standards were tough. And I also thought that I wasn't going to be able to afford it, because I thought, if I did want to get in, I would have had to have good grades to get good scholarships. So long story short, after floundering around a little bit in high school, eventually I decided that I wanted to join the Marine Corps. And part of that has to do with, the area I grew up in. As I said, it was an army town. So I had a lot of respect and admired a lot of the soldiers in town. And I saw them as, I really looked up to them. And so for me, not necessarily knowing that thinking that school wasn't going to be an option, and thinking that my other options were just going to be working retail, working construction, or maybe getting lucky and getting a job with the government somewhere. I decided to take, the opportunity of joining the Marine Corps. And so long story short, Marine Corps taught me a lot of things. I was a linguist in the Marine Corps, and I ended up doing pretty well, and mostly because I was afraid of failing. So I studied hard so that I wouldn't fail.
That can be a motivating factor.
Yeah, but there was a real blessing and a gift in that, because that is what taught me how to study, and that is what gave me the confidence to be able to actually pursue my undergraduate at the University of Arizona after I was done with the Marine Corps.
So what did you study? What did you study at Arizona? Did you study economics or did you business or?
So I studied economics, right? And part of the reason that I did study economics, right? And I told you how, you know, this idea of like, because I saw it, right? I saw it with my dad. I saw it with his workers, how job opportunities and employment prospects in the United States can make a material difference in people's lives. You know, I saw it in my dad's life. I saw it in our life. I saw it in my dad's workers' lives. And I even saw it to a certain extent while I was in the service, when I was in Afghanistan. And, you know, one of the benefits of being a linguist was that I really understood the people and the culture and got to speak with them and communicate with them. And I realized that a big part of the problems that they were having too, with the Taliban and with, you know, the acts of terrorism and stuff like that, was because of a lack of opportunities. And the Taliban provided that. The Afghan military provided that.
One thing that occurs to me, Sergio, is that part of Catholic social teaching, I think its strength is this understanding of the epistemology of experience, that we know through either our own experience or the experience of another, we know something to be true. So the fact that you approached economics not as an abstraction, but rather from the concrete experience of the lives of your family members, seeing that economic opportunities make a material, as you say, concrete difference, or your experience in Afghanistan. And sometimes I think what happens with economic life is we sometimes do approach it, and we'll get into this in a minute, but sometimes as an abstraction. How had you grown up Catholic? Where did your Catholic faith play a part in your life?
So I did grow up Catholic. I mean, my parents were very devout. We went to mass every Sunday when I was a younger child. I do remember that. And, you know, my Catholic faith was always a big part of me growing up. And specifically, the aspect that I feel like was always strongest with me growing up was this idea that God loves you no matter what, right? And that he's always gonna be there for you and is always gonna support you even through difficult times, right? And this was something that was pretty persistent with me up until even when I was in the Marine Corps, because, you know, that's when I probably started taking the initiative to go to mass on my own, was once I was actually in the service.
So move us now to how the University of Minnesota and their PhD program in economics, how did that come about? Are they known for it? Is it something that you were drawn to? How did that opportunity come about? And also just to let us know how you all ended up at Lourdes. We have, I think, most of the folks on the call are Lourdes parishioners. So yeah, tell us how you ended up at the U of M and how you ended up at Lourdes, and a little bit about your program. I think you're coming to an end. Are you in your?
I'm in my 5th year, so I'm about to start my 6th year, which is my final year.
Okay, so yeah, tell us a little bit about how you ended up here.
Well, so I met my wife while I was in the service, and she decided that she wanted to get out of the military. And for a second, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, whether I was going to stay in, whether I was going to be a defense contractor, or whether I was going to go back to school. And long story short, we figured out that it was feasible because of the GI Bill for both of us to go back to school. So that's how I got into the University of Arizona, because we had this generous support from the government through the GI Bill, and we were able to go to school. They provided us a living stipend and they paid for our tuition. And so for me, as mentioning, how I kind of saw the importance of like economic opportunities and job opportunities for people. And at a young age, I really liked politics too. So I started studying economics. And as soon as I started taking my economics classes, I just loved it. And, after doing something like the Marines, where I felt like I had a lot of meaning in my life, I wanted to do something else that had an equivalent sense of meaning where I could give back to my community.
Hmm.
And so, I liked my economics classes. I did really well in my economics classes and in my math classes. So I just decided, you know what, I could just keep doing this. And during my senior year, I applied for the best programs I could get into. And I got into some really good programs, actually. I mean, I applied for University of Arizona's program in case we wanted to stay close to family. But I also got into Northwestern University, University of California, San Diego, and University of Minnesota, which are all in the top 20 for econ programs.
That's great. And so you chose the one with the best climate, apparently.
I chose Minnesota because it worked best for me and my wife. That's the short answer for it, because
Which is always a prudent decision.
my wife was doing a master's and she was able to transfer her master's to Minnesota.
That's great.
Yeah, so that's why I picked Minnesota. Minnesota's been a blessing. I've been
So how did you, we can always circle back to the Lourdes question, but at some point and it may have been growing up or maybe later in your study of economics, how did you start to gain an interest in Catholic social teaching and a knowledge of Catholic social teaching? How did that come about?
So I became interested in Catholic social teaching, in a sense, because, I mean, growing up, I've probably fallen victim to being enamored with either side of the political debate. And after a while, sometimes it's like, well, it seems like there's something to both sides, but I don't really know what it is. And I don't really know what's right about it. And at the same time too, especially as soon as I began my graduate studies, pretty much my first 2 years, it was nothing but economics. And the only thing that I was thinking about was economics. And I started to feel a kind of spiritual dryness, in a fact that, in a sense where I didn't necessarily know what I was doing it for. And my faith has always been very important to me. And I've always felt like somehow, right, there's something important about this work. And as soon as I started, and really the catalyst for me getting more involved in Catholic social teaching was through the work that I do as a research analyst. I ended up going to a conference where I became introduced to Credo, which was a group of Catholic research economists. And they had a conference in Jerusalem for economists that were interested in Catholic social thought. And I applied for it and they accepted me. And in a sense, it helped me reorient my studies and my profession in a way where I can keep it in line with my faith and my ideals and make sure that I'm using my studies in a way that's good.
That's great. So before we get to the invitation for the Vatican conference, I'll ask you the same question I asked Monsignor. If there was one other profession other than economics that you could have seen yourself in, what do you think that would have been?
So I think for me, I was thinking about this today, and I think there's two answers. So the first one, because I really feel like these were turning points in my life where I could have seen myself sticking on this road and sticking through it for the rest of my life. So the first one, honestly, was my job at Target. When I was in high school, the first job that I got that I really liked was working on the sales floor at Target. And I was actually pretty good at it. I liked it. I had a great work environment. My bosses were really supportive. They gave me lots of projects to work on and gave me a lot of autonomy. And, you know, I enjoyed it. And they were even talking about, before I left for the Marine Corps, how they, if I would stay, they would like to make me like a floor manager. And so I could have seen myself doing that and being happy doing that. The second thing was staying a linguist, whether that would have been in the Marine Corps or whether that would have been working for the government. And again, it's because, you know, I really enjoyed that job, and it was a fun job, and I could have seen myself doing it for the rest of my life.
That's great. You had also mentioned politics, and I was thinking, you know, we have our parishioner Mike Rainville running for 3rd Ward. We could also, you know, see if you wanted to run for city council, and you know, we'll get a whole Lourdes kind of contingent. You might have to move strategically so you can be in a different locale, so you and Michael aren't competing. But you'd be a good politician too. You got a good personality and smarts. And so, you know, never close that door.
Maybe.
Who knows? Who
I
knows?
think I'm much more comfortable in the realm of giving advice instead of.
There you go. So let's move now to this really kind of very cool thing that happened, and the process of, you know, suddenly you find yourself invited to this conference, the Francesco economy, which is really trying to encourage a more inclusive economy. It's been part of Francis's teaching and Fratelli Tutti and other places in his encyclicals. I know Focolare and other Catholic groups have really done some great work. I was at a conference in San Antonio on an inclusive economy. You and I were talking about maybe meeting up in Italy, as we were going to be there at a similar time, and then COVID happens and gets shut down. But the conference happened virtually, and if you could just talk a little bit about before we get into your theory and the application, how the invitation came about, and then your experience of obviously probably disappointed that you weren't able to go to Italy in person. But then the conference that did happen and some of the insights that you came away with.
So I found out about the conference first through the Catholic social teaching seminar I went to in Jerusalem. They mentioned it there, and they said, oh, by the way, the Pope is calling this conference in Jerusalem. You guys should think about it. And then I was reminded about it because I ended up meeting a professor at St. Thomas in Jerusalem, Monsignor Schlag, and
Sure.
me and him have established a friendship, and I've gone to his weekly Opus Dei circle meetings. And while I was there, he told me, I think you should apply for this conference. I think you'd be a good fit. So I applied for the conference. I was really excited about going to the conference, and I was supposed to be part of a group of, so they let in 2,000 students, and I was supposed to be part of a group of 200 that were going to do a pre-event where I suppose we were supposed to plan some other things related to the event. But of course, the pandemic happened, it got canceled, and so we had to figure out how we were going to proceed once that happened. So what happened, long story short, instead of the conference happening in March, it ended up happening in November. And because of the limitations of us not being able to be there in person, meeting in person, we started breaking up into groups. I broke up in the group that focused on inequality, and we started having discussion sessions, webinars, and starting projects to prepare for the November event in Italy. And I actually was involved as a custodian of a group called the Research and Publications Group, where our whole mission is to come up with principles for how to judge our economy, discussing the reality of the global economy and our local economies, and then thinking about ways how to fix it. So that's the group that I've been involved in. And the event happened in November. And more or less, even though the event was in November, it sort of feels like it's been continuing since March, because we've been continuing to meet, continuing to have discussions, and continuing to think about how we can make what we've taught bear fruit in the real world.
That's terrific. I would imagine you've met some terrific people in terms of faith-filled, bright, caring. And you get such a sense for the global church,
Yeah.
with folks from all over the world.
Yes, and you had mentioned my takeaways, and I think for me, my experience in the economy of Francesco has been really, in a sense, very humbling, because I don't know. I mean, I suppose we're trained to look at the world and think about how we could solve the problems, right? And I think even as Americans, we tend to think of the world that way too. It's something that I experienced while I was in the military, right? There's this country, it's got these problems, we got to go in there, we got to fix it, right? And the economy of Francesco was very different, because we had groups of students from all over the world, from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from Latin America, from North America. And one of the things that I learned very quickly was that, the other people in this group, they have something to contribute. They have ideas. They have a different experience that I can learn from. And I don't necessarily have to have all the answers. And so it's been really nice to just see how much we have in common, how much certain problems still persist, even though there's different institutional frameworks around. And just to see, that, me and somebody from Latin America and somebody from Europe, we can all be concerned about the same issue and want to do something about it.
Yeah. You're all not, this is not the Tower of Babel, because we speak a common language, and it's the language of our Catholic faith and teaching. And so whatever culture or language people come from, we share this common faith language. I was so struck. I had an opportunity to teach international students in Budapest in a summer course on sustainability and law. And I had the piece on Catholic social teaching. And smartest students were the students not from the United States, from Africa and Indonesia. I remember 2 women students. I could not believe the answer they wrote to my questions after a very intensive period of Catholic social teaching, and how brilliant the answers were. But the fact that they were all Catholic students, from various parts of the world, who had, this common language and culture. That really is remarkable. And I think of what we actually can do when Catholics come together. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about after your slides, and we'll now move into that area, is we've got everybody in the Catholic communion. So Joe Biden, Paul Ryan, and Marco Rubio all have probably more than a working knowledge of Catholic social teaching, and all have interests in economics and budgets and human flourishing and collective flourishing. But they're certainly going to come at these issues in a very different way and come to different conclusions. There may be some areas of commonality and bridging, and that's one of the complexities. Sergio, if you want to take us through, I want to leave time for questions, and we're going to end at 6:45. But if you want to take us through, and I can't remember if you answered my question from the earlier email, whether you're okay with, obviously this is your intellectual work product, and nobody's going to put it off as their own. I did share this with attribution with my law students this past fall, and they found it very helpful in our section on economic life. But if these are all parishioners, if you could make this available such that they can kind of dig in, in their own time. But if you want to do the share screen and kind of take us through, he's got some slides where he applies Catholic social teaching to economic life.
Yeah, no problem. I'm more than happy to share this. So, I mean, everybody can take a look at it. Give me
And fo-
feedback if you would, that would also be great. But yes,
folks, you're welcome to put any messages, questions, or comments um, in the chat function for Sergio.
okay. And so, I mean, this is just pretty much, I mean, the way that I usually like to think about, the way that I grapple with ideas and I try to think about things is it usually helps for me to just like write something. And so these slides are kind of a way that I've been trying to like think about, you know, the intersection between Catholic social thought and the economy. And I think Father Dan was kind of alluding to the fact that, you know, we do have a lot of different people who are Catholics who say that they do care about Catholic social thought and they come to different conclusions about things. And so at least what I'm hoping to like emphasize are just some values that we can use so that we can really just, you know, understand the framework, be able to like pray on this and act on this and you know, just, you know, at least be aware because I mean, I do think, right, there are going to be disagreements. We are going to come to different conclusions. And the ideas that I have might not be ideas that other people think are the best ideas. But, you know, I think it's important if we do have this common framework that we can enter into discussion and dialogue and be able to at least hear each other out and act in good faith as we're trying to make our economy better.
Great. And let me give you just a kind of a warning. Let's try to do this piece in about 15 minutes. And that way we'll leave a good 15 minutes for the chat. If you take a little more than that, we're fine, but we'll leave some time for the questions and comments. So go for it.
Okay. So, I mean, we talked about the economy of Francesco. Specifically, what the Pope wanted from this event was for the people who participate to enter a covenant to change today's economy and give a soul to the economy of tomorrow. And specifically, what he's thinking about is promoting a humane, life-giving economy that not only cares for the poor and marginalized, but also for the environment as well. And so that raises the question, like, what is it that needs conversion in our economic life? And so, I mean, the reality is, you know, the United States is a very wealthy country. And despite that, we still have a lot of problems. We still have a lot of inequality in health. We have a lot of inequality in mortality, education, labor market outcomes, criminal justice outcomes. And a lot of these are correlated with socioeconomic status and racial and ethnic status. And even the pandemic has sort of exposed some of this in the fact that immediately we were able to see disproportionate effects by socioeconomic status and race and ethnicity. We saw Blacks and Hispanics had higher unemployment, higher death and hospitalization rates. And we saw that lower income Americans were more affected by unemployment as well. And regardless of whether you think it's a problem or not, the fact that inequality has increased since the 40s and the fact that there are still these persistent gaps, it makes many Americans feel very disillusioned with our economy. And I think that's serious. And it should be something we should pay attention to. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about some principles that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has given that helps us think about how we're to judge the economy. And I think they derive these a lot from the teaching of subsidiarity, solidarity, the preferential option for the poor, and the universal destination of goods. So to me, that seems like the things that are kind of in the background here. So these first three, I grouped them together and said that they're principles for judging. And so the first fundamental principle is that the economy is supposed to serve man or humanity, and humanity is not supposed to serve the economy. So the economy exists for us and not us for the economy. So that raises the question sometimes, right? If this specific policy is going to lead to massive unemployment but increased wealth, well, we should ask ourselves, Is that serving humanity, the human people in our economy, or are we seeing the people in our economy as disposable for more material gain or wealth? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, there might be reasons why you want to accept that, but you should still think about it. The second thing, so principle 2 and 3 also give us important metrics for how to judge the economy, right? And so notice what the bishops are saying is that the economy should protect the dignity of the human person. It should support the family. It should serve the common good. And a fundamental measure of the economy is how the poor, marginalized, and vulnerable are faring, right? So these are things that we have to think about when we're thinking about the effects of economic policies and our economic choices as well, because economics is not just policies, it's also the decisions that we make in the marketplace, when we hire, when we fire, when we're looking for work and stuff like that. Now, of course, the economy is concerned with resources, goods, and services and opportunities. And so the bishops say that all people have a right to secure the basic necessities, right? And notice it's not just food, water, clothing, and shelter. They're also talking about education, healthcare, and safety, as well as environmental security. Also, everybody has a right to good work, to good economic initiative, to good wages, to good working conditions, and even joining unions and other associations. And this corresponds to Catholic social teaching very well too, in that it's part of Catholic social teaching that work is a very important part of creation. Work, in a sense, is how we participate in God's creation of the world. So the bishops say that all people, to the extent that they are able to, have a right, have a duty to work and a responsibility to provide not only for their family, but for the broader society as well. And so I think just thinking about these principles, we could already start to think about, all right, do all people have access to education? Do all people have access to healthcare? Do all people have access to shelter? Is everybody able to use their economic potential and work? And we could already think about how inequality affects this. We could already think about how even the formerly incarcerated are deprived of this, right? Because notice, they're saying all people, not just rich people, not just middle income people, not just people who have never committed a crime, but all people, right? And of course, we have to think about in practice how we actually achieve that. So the bishops say that there's clear limits and advantages to markets, to the government, as well as voluntary groups, and they all have their own role, and you have to respect their proper spheres, more or less. But if there is a lack of people assuring opportunity or meeting their basic needs or even justice, then society can intervene with government action. And I think a very good example of this was the Civil Rights Act, where there was real injustice not being met out in economic life. A lot of it was providing lower quality services to people of color, prohibiting employment to people of color, and the federal government stepped in and tried to do away with that. The other thing is too, that the bishops want us to know is that more or less everybody's responsible. Everybody's a moral agent, whether you're a worker, an owner, a manager, a stockholder, or a consumer. And our choices are what diminish economic opportunity, community life, and social justice, or promote it. And also, it's not just about our little piece of land, our economy. We have to think about the effect of our economy on the rest of the world, specifically about how we're promoting human life and human rights. So what do we do about it? What are ways that we can go about transforming the economy? And, you know, the answer is going to depend a lot on your specific situation. So I think it's really important that you think about this and you pray on this, right? And the way I like to think about it is that the spiritual aspects, our spiritual life should feed into the practical things that we do. And so we have to focus on both. So I think these are a couple things that I've noticed, right? A worldly economy, right? Economy, a lot of this might be just like cliche, stereotypical, what we think of when we go through like an Econ 101 class. And it's not necessarily what all economists believe or what all business people believe. But I think there's a real contrast here. And sometimes we subconsciously fall into this trap, right? And all three of these things, I think they're interrelated. So if we think about a worldly economy, I think these are three flaws, right? One is economic life divorced from morality. There's this idea that your economic life is value neutral, or it has nothing to do with morality, right? So you just go to the marketplace, you buy your goods and services. That's an amoral activity. You don't have to worry about it too much. There is an excessive focus on the individual, and that doesn't even necessarily have to be the individual self, but it could be the individual group. It could be the individual country. It could be, in some cases, even excessively focusing on your family instead of everybody else, right? And then the other thing is we tend to measure success as growth or wealth or satisfaction of desires. And I want to contrast this with more of a Christian sense of the economy, which is that we have to live out the gospel in economic life. You know, there's no such thing as an economic life that's divorced from morality, because our choices, they affect the economic reality. And sometimes there are things that we just shouldn't be participating in. The second thing is we have to recognize that we're all interconnected, not just humanity, but creation also. And our success should really be in how well we're serving each other in creation. And were you going to say something, Father Dan?
Oh, just when you get to three, just one piece, but this is really really important stuff. Just really critical for all of us to help guide us in thinking about our approach to the economy. So great work.
Okay, thank you. And then some spiritual values, some things I've been thinking about, right, is we should practice spiritual poverty versus pursuing greed and status. And spiritual poverty is the sense where you recognize your dependence on God, more or less, right? You recognize that that's what you really need in life, and not so much the accumulation of goods and services. The other thing is we should live in a spirit of gratitude versus a spirit of scarcity, which in that sense means realizing that everything that we have is a gift. And once we do that, we could become better stewards instead of accumulators, and we could think about why it is we receive these gifts and what we should use these gifts for. And rather than just thinking about self-gratification, we should also be willing to make sacrifices and take risks. And sometimes that means, giving money to somebody that you don't think is necessarily going to use it right. Or sometimes it's giving a job to somebody who looks like they're risky. The other thing is we should remember to cooperate and remember our interdependence instead of being competitive, because at the end of the day, we all rely on each other. Even our country relies on other countries too. And this is something that I think is very dear to Pope Francis. He also wants us to live a culture of encounter versus avoidance and mastery. And this is something that he told us at the end, is he said we should work with, think with, and learn from the poor. And we should do that as opposed to ignoring them or working and thinking for them. They are our partners in this new economy. So, the practical side, right? We all have different opportunities. There's different ways that we could do things. So if you're an entrepreneur, the best thing to do is pay attention to the needs of the community and serve that. Provide a good or a service that fulfills that need for the community. That's the good part of being an entrepreneur. But you also have to make sure that you serve all the stakeholders, which includes your workers, includes your community, and includes creation. Managers have to serve their workers and their needs, and that means providing good wages, opportunities, time off, and time for health and family. Workers faithfully execute your obligations, but also give time to things that are important, like your family. And consumers, I think it's important that we stay awake and be aware of what we're consuming and the effects of it as well. So, I mean, here's some things that just based off of like my practical studies that I think are real obstacles for, especially in inequality, right? So I think community is an important part of inequality. There's certain aspects that are associated with good economic outcomes. And these are things that we actually promote in Catholic social teaching, right? So less segregation, right? That means more community between low income, high income, and people of different races.
Mm.
The other thing is good quality schools and more school funding. These are things that lead to good outcomes for kids. Stronger family structures, right? So having high fatherhood presence. And the other thing is strong social capital, which means you got different groups of people working together and helping each other out. And, you know, I don't think we should look at these things and blame neighborhoods for not having these things, because in a lot of ways, a lot of these things are interconnected, right? So for ethnic and racial inequality, I don't think we can escape the effect of the criminal justice system or immigration. Like, it's a part of this community aspect and it feeds into these communities. And there's plenty of evidence of racial and ethnic profiling and police interactions, hiring decisions, and running of services that, you know,
I think you might be muted.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
I'm not able to hear you.
Yep, I can hear him.
Okay, that's on my end. Sorry, Sergio.
Oh, it's okay. But anyway, so yeah, so I think these things, it's important, right? And we should take it as more of, we should think about how these economic systems that we have, or these criminal justice practices that we have, how they affect communities. And we always have to keep in mind whether they lead to a healthier environment or a less healthy environment. Other thing that's important in inequality is healthcare cost. There's a lot of times where healthcare shocks can pretty much just destroy a poor person's income or lead to just, you know, bad outcomes. And we also can't ignore the effect of our policies on the environment or the important role that women play in our economy. So I think these are things that tend to come out of like the inequality literature that are empirically verified, and that are things that we really need to work on. And we're not going to be perfect at it, but we just have to try. So, I mean, these are things, just to end on a positive note, there's lots of things that we can do, right? So one thing is we could stay informed. We could learn about the impacts of economic policy, our consumption patterns, right? See what the effect of them are on workers and the environment. We can support businesses that provide good job opportunities. Like in Minneapolis, there's All Square. They provide jobs for the formerly incarcerated. And one that I recently heard of was Fructus, which assists Catholic farmers and provides ethically raised farm products, which is good for the environment. The other thing is there's a lot of good Catholic schools in town providing good education to lower income or marginalized communities. And there's ways you could get involved by being a tutor through Catholic Tutor Corps, or volunteering and giving support to the Ascension schools, to Cristo Rey, and many others. There's Catholic hospitals, Catholic health initiatives. There's prison ministry that provides services and aid to the incarcerated so that they could have better transitions into society. We could learn about the effects of racial, ethnic, gender bias, and just attend dialogue and listening sessions so that we could learn firsthand from people affected, so that we could work with people affected instead of working for them. The other thing is, you know, we're a big church. We can build community with other parishes that are different than ours, right? And once the pandemic's over, maybe we could do it by volunteering, going to their masses, or inviting them to our parish events. In line with that is supporting our sister parish in Tijuana, strengthen our families, our prayer life, and bring Christ to our world. The other thing is, don't be afraid to encounter, work with, and learn from people who are different than you, including the marginalized and the stranger. And I think a big thing that motivates me a lot is, you know, just the teachings of Christ. Without cost you have received, without cost you are to give. And if you recognize that, then you can see in your life there's so many opportunities for you to give your time, talent, and treasure. So these are gospel passages that I think very much touch on our economic reality. There's the parable of the rich fool. There's the rich man and Lazarus, the rich young man, the judgment of the nations, the Good Samaritan, and the Beatitudes. And so if you're serious about trying to think of how to convert your own life and the economy, then, you know, I would pray and meditate on these and think about, you know, how well you live up to them or how well you don't. And, you know, ask God for help in doing that. And then these are sources, these are books that I've read that I think are really good and talk about either being a Catholic and living in the economy. There's Following Christ in a Consumer Society by John F. Kavanaugh. Two really good economics books that talk about, you know, actual empirical good economic research. That's Poor Economics and Good Economics for Hard Times by Duflo and Banerjee, who won the Nobel Prize 2 years ago. And then this collection of essays, A Catholic Spirituality for Business. And then these are all sources where you could more or less get more information.
That's great. Great resources. There's also, it's not particularly in the area of economics, but Michael Naughton, who runs the Center for Catholic Studies at St. Thomas, has done a lot of great work on the dignity of work, which relates very much to the topic of economics, and he has a couple sources that I can share as well. This was really helpful. What really struck me, Sergio, and we'll get to the chat function. We've got about 10 minutes left. Let me get, this is from Bert. Thank you. Sergio, I have to run to another meeting. Your work is important and you're a great example and influencer. So Bert is one of our trustees and a good friend of all of ours. So the fact that what you present is substantive, it's based in data, it's based in faith, you present it in a way that is inspiring and exhortative and not shaming and moralizing. And then it has a practical, here's what we can do. This is the best of how we're called to apply Catholic social teaching. It's actually, in a sense, what is helpful for my not only students to hear, but also parishioners about this is how we apply what we believe in terms of our faith. One other thing that I would say that I think is helpful, and folks, any type of questions or comments you have, I've got a few. If we don't have chat questions, a few of my own in the remaining time we have. But one of the patterns that Sergio implicitly expressed is in Catholic social teaching, something that's called to see, to judge, and to act. So we look through our eyes, through our reason. We see what might be an issue of injustice or a problem. We judge it, which Sergio talked about, judging the economy according to principles of Catholic social teaching. And then we act in a way that, how can we fix it? How can we build a more just and inclusive economy? One of the things that struck me from my evening prayer today was one of the reasons I was trying to pray both my evening prayer and Mass before this session, and got a little bit of a late start on the Zoom call, is we always read from the Magnificat. And I might include the Magnificat in that list. You had the 3 paradigmatic texts from Catholic social teaching listed, and then I would add the Magnificat as well. So this is Mary basically saying, those who are lowly are going to be exalted, and those like the rich man and the Lazarus and the rich man who exalt themselves without reference or concern for their brother and sister will be brought low. And it's the Lucan reversal. Now, what strikes me is we do the inverse in our economic life. In Catholic social teaching, the human person is supposed to be at the heart of the economy. And what do? We reverse it. That we end up in so many ways serving the economy rather than the human person, everyone, including the poor and the marginalized, at the heart of the economy. How do you plan to incorporate Catholic social teaching into your PhD thesis? That's a great question.
So for me, right, Catholic social teaching informs the questions that I want to study, right? So for me, my faith and the teachings of the church guide me in the sort of empirical applications and the questions that I want to study. And particularly what I study is economic inequality and why some people are left out and other people succeed. And so for me, in order to be able to actually help people succeed more and help people have more opportunities, I have to understand what are the problems that they're facing. And so for me, that's how Catholic social teaching informs my work as an economist. It helps me think of what questions and what topics I really want to work on, right? Because there's lots of things I could study in economics, and some of them might not even be like promoting Catholic social teaching. So for me, it's about, where I do my research. And then from there, I could present my research to the community, and I could, make it a part of the stuff that we do in economics.
Great. Another question from our viewers here. How to spread Catholic social teaching to other leaders, politicians, and business leaders? How do we get the word out?
Ooh, well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, maybe Father Dan has some ideas. One thing I would be interested in that I think would be cool would be to just have groups that study Catholic social teaching and think about it, and maybe inviting politicians and business leaders to be part of these discussions too. But that's just my idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think priests and bishops need to teach and preach more about it. Sometimes they either don't know Catholic social teaching to the degree that they should, frankly, or are a little hesitant about getting into that realm. But as Sergio demonstrated beautifully, you can present values and principles that raise questions and promote a certain vision of economic life that is more inclusive without being moralizing. And Sergio, what I would ask you, because this is a tension that you see among the various political camps, this question about, and our friend Matt Gulseth gets into this concern often when he talks about, how much should the government be involved? We just had a $1.9 trillion stimulus pass without one Republican on either the House or the Senate. And so they had fundamental objections in terms of it wasn't targeted, it wasn't the size, whatever it is. And I'll ask this question quickly because we have another question that came in. And there is a real concern among some Catholics that when you give the government too much power, or when you create systems of dependence, or when the government touches too much, it can tend to control. Sometimes people don't have the autonomy to live their lives in a way that's consistent with their own ethical and moral vision and principles. How do we balance that aspect of, seeing the government as a positive, especially in times of real crisis, but also the risk of having the government too involved in people's lives in a way that really isn't consistent with their dignity?
So there's two things I think about with that. I guess to begin with, I think it's very difficult to figure out how to demarcate these things, right? Because even as I was going through the principles, we could see that, at least the way the bishops define it, that the government has a role, and sometimes it has a moral duty to act when certain things aren't being met. As far as making sure that the government stays in check, well, then I think it's important to keep politicians accountable and to let them know, let them hear your voice. And I think one of the problems is that today we just tend to fall into either political camp and don't necessarily try to make our political camp more fit our values. So I think, you know, that's something we can all do. We can all, you know, send more emails to our legislators. We could all try to talk more to our legislators. We could try to get organized as a block, you know, and it's really helpful, I think, to go back, especially right now in this time, and look at what was accomplished with the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
And even if you take a look at the work of Cesar Chavez, who was a Catholic man also, the amount of change they were able to enact because they all got together and they all put pressure on these politicians or these institutions to change. And you're only going to be able to do that if you let your voice heard and if you get with other people who do that.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing I would say is probably like, that's probably where our work as economists is important, is because one of the really good things that we're good at doing is showing the downsides of government policies.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's what I would say. I'd say the research, right? The research helps, but also making your voice heard.
Great, great wisdom. Final two questions, and I might take a stab at this first one. It's somewhat jokingly. For those of us coming from a place of economic privilege, born into a wealthy family, how can we help bridge the gap of economic inequality? Well, you can give your family wealth to Our Lady of Lourdes, and we'll take half and give it to Matthew 25 Fund and help bridge particular gaps in inequality. We'll let Sergio guide us on where we can best use that. So he may have an answer on that that is less cheeky than mine. And then the second question from Ryan Hamilton, and we'll end it with these two questions. We're going to make Sergio's slides available. There's so much good information, Sergio. I've seen different iterations. The past iterations were fantastic, and it gets better and better as you go through these steps. So we'll make that available to folks. And then final from Ryan, which is a really important question, as was the previous one. Sergio, can you say a little more about social capital, particularly the tremendous social capital that American Catholics possess? How do we get people to share their relationships rather than just their money?
Okay. So, I mean, I think both of these questions are great and they're both related. So for Megan, I would say, yes, always be willing to give, right? And it might not just be your money, it might be, you know, as Ryan is alluding, your social capital, right? The skills that you possess that you could give to somebody else to help them achieve more opportunities. So I think, I mean, I guess for Megan, I would just say, like, you know, just keep an eye out in your life to the opportunities that you have to give other people opportunities, right? And that might be through material means, but that might even be through, if you're ever on a hiring committee, right? Hiring somebody who is qualified, but might face some obstacles, right? Or thinking about how you could help more people like that get into the office or something like that, you know, or donating your time. And, you know, I think for Ryan, I feel like in a sense, I'm going to kind of quote you because I heard this from Matt Golseth. He said that it's one of the best things he heard from you, which is we got to not be afraid to get our hands dirty, right? Sometimes it's easier to just give people money, right? Sometimes it's easier to walk by a homeless person on the street and give him money. And it's harder to sit there and have a conversation with him, you know? And I think we have to not be afraid to not only interact with other people, but be vulnerable with other people. And I think that's very difficult. But, you know, sometimes it helps, and it especially helps for children.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And just in conclusion, two things I would offer is that is really at the heart of our incarnate God, who was vulnerable and entered into our humanity. He didn't stay aloof from our need, but enter right into the messiness of this world, and then calls his disciples to do likewise. I think that's a lot of real wisdom. I loved how you connected the two questions. Sergio, throughout my life, I've met a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, too few people, but I've met people and I've always admired people who have a really potent combination of head and heart. And you, my friend, my brother in Christ, have that potent combination. God has gifted you with a really good mind and a really good heart. That's a light. It's the light of reason and the light of love. And when the two come together as they do in your life and your presentation and your work, it's really extraordinarily moving. And so we're really count you as our fellow parishioner, but also our fellow sojourner as Catholics trying to live our faith that we have been given as a gift. So I really thank you for your time and for your work. I thank everybody who gathered. Other people will see this as we've recorded it, and we're going to get, Julie will get it out far and wide. I thank the couple who have made these St. Anthony sessions, particularly the live stream, as there's a cost to that possible. And we're going to continue with programming in at least in April and May, and maybe even June as well. And then we hope to be back for another year beginning in September. But I thank Sergio Barrera for his great work and his really insightful presentation. And we'll do a kind of a clap here. And so thanks everybody for joining us. It's a terrific community at Lourdes. We know that. We're thankful. And we're thankful again for Sergio. Have a great night, everybody. And remember that God loves you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.